Today, I want to tell you a moving story from the Arizona frontier in the winter of 1880. It's about a young woman, cast out and hungry, and an Apache man, scarred by war. Together, they faced lies, betrayal, and the cold, and yet found something far greater hope, and a true home. Let me begin their story. The storm had been blowing down from the mountains for 2 days straight, rolling off the white-capped peaks of the Chiricahuas like an angry spirit that refused to rest. Wind drove through the narrow streets of Silver Rock with a shrill cry, rattling loose shutters and tearing signs from their hooks. Snow spun in every direction, coating boots and wagon wheels, blinding horses that stumbled along the frozen ruts. Eleanor Hayes pulled her thin wool shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it had little warmth left to give. The fabric was worn to threads at the hem, and her hands, cracked and raw from cold, clutched it as if it might still serve as a shield. She pressed herself deeper into the shadow of the alley, beside Kelly's saloon, away from the blast of the wind. Her stomach knotted, hollow from 3 days without food. The kitchen door of the saloon swung open, and the smell of frying beef and onions swept into the night. Eleanor's knees weakened at the scent. She had once known such suppers when she lived under her father's roof in Missouri, before her brother's lies had stripped her of a family and a name. In those days, she never imagined that hunger could be so sharp. It burned like fire in her belly. Now, it was a familiar companion. She crouched near the wall, drawing her knees against her chest. She had slept beneath porches, in stables, even once in the back of a freight wagon when the driver wasn't looking. Tonight, the wind seemed determined to drive her out into the open, to strip away the last bit of dignity she clung to. The saloon doors burst wide with a slam of laughter and heat. 2 miners lurched out, their boots crunching in the drifted snow, breath rising in frosty clouds. Their voices carried, thick with whiskey. "Looky here," one slurred, his eyes narrowing toward the alley. "What have we got hiding back there?" Eleanor stiffened, pressing her back against the frozen bricks. The man stumbled closer, swaying. "Well, ain't you a pretty bird out in the cold? You look half-starved." His grin revealed yellowed teeth. "I can fix that. Got a room upstairs, fire in the stove, bed soft enough. You come along. I'll see you fed." Her voice trembled, barely audible against the howl of wind. "Leave me be." "Aw, don't be like that." He reached for her arm. "It's a fair trade, girl. You ain't got nowhere else to go." She twisted away, fear spiking through her chest. "No." The word came louder now, but her voice still shook. His face hardened. "Don't go thinking you're better than the rest. I heard tell about you. Folks talk." When his hand closed again around her sleeve, another voice cut through the night. Deep, steady, unhurried. "The lady said no." The miner froze, his hand still on Eleanor's arm. Both men turned. From the edge of the street stepped a tall figure. Snow clung to the shoulders of a doeskin coat, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. A long braid of black hair lay against his chest, dusted white with flakes. The firelight from the saloon flickered across his cheekbones, sharp and dark, and the burn scars that twisted down his left arm, visible where the coat hung loose. His eyes were what held them, gray as tempered steel, steady as the mountains themselves. "This ain't your business," the miner snapped, though his voice faltered. The newcomer didn't raise his voice. "It is now." A tense silence stretched between them. The miner's hand hovered near his pistol. His friend tugged at his sleeve. "Come on, Amos. Ain't worth it." Amos spat into the snow, glaring once more at Eleanor. "You ain't worth the trouble anyway." With a curse, he turned and staggered back toward the saloon, his partner in tow. The alley fell quiet again, save for the wind's restless cry. Eleanor sagged against the wall, her legs trembling so badly she thought they might give way. The stranger studied her with an expression that wasn't pity, something quieter, steadier. "You're cold," he said at last. "I'm fine," she lied. His gaze didn't waver. "When's the last time you ate?" She looked away, shame burning in her chest. Without another word, he unfastened his coat and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and sage. Warmth spread through her body so swiftly it almost brought tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" He met her eyes, voice calm. "Because someone should." He extended a gloved hand. "Nietzsche. I keep a place up in Lone Butte." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the coat he'd given her. "Eleanor Hayes." Nietzsche nodded once. "I know what folks say in this town. I don't care. I watch with my own eyes. You're not what they call you. What is it you want?" "My house needs tending. Firewood stacked, meals cooked. It ain't charity, it's work, honest." She stared at him, searching for any trace of deceit. There was none. Only weariness and something else, something like sorrow, buried deep. "What's the catch?" No catch, just a chance. Snow fell thick between them, muffling the street. "You trust strangers that easy?" she asked. Nietzsche's mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. "Not usually. But you don't strike me as the kind of woman who lies about being hungry." Her voice broke. "Yes." "Then let's get you fed." He guided her toward the edge of town, where a horse stood tethered to a small wagon. She hesitated before climbing aboard, glancing once over her shoulder at the glowing windows of the saloon, at the laughter spilling into the night. That world had no place for her now. The wagon lurched forward as Nietzsche snapped the reins. Snow thickened, swirling like ghosts around them. Eleanor pulled the coat tighter and lowered her head against the cold. Silence stretched long, broken only by the creak of wood and the snort of horses' feces. She stole a glance at him. His jaw was set, his scarred arm firm on the reins, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. She wanted to ask who he was, why he lived apart from town, what had carved those scars into his skin, but she bit the questions back. After a time she said softly, "How far is your place?" 2 hours in good weather, more in this." The horses trudged on, their breath rising in clouds. The road climbed out of the valley, into the wild land beyond the reach of Silver Rock's lamps. Eleanor's fingers numbed in the cold. She rubbed them together, then looked at him again. "You live alone. For a while now. No wife?" "No." His answers were short but not unkind. He was a man who spoke only what needed saying. That somehow unsettled her more than slick words ever could. Her gaze drifted to the white ridges ahead, where the storm clouds pressed low against the mountains. This was a country vast and unyielding, as if it had no place for the small and fragile. She felt both fear and a strange stirring of hope. For the first time in months, she was not entirely alone. As the wagon climbed higher, Nietzsche's land came into view. A low cabin of rough-hewn logs stood against the base of Lone Butte. Its roof slanted beneath snow. A barn leaned nearby, and smoke curled faintly from a stone chimney. Eleanor drew in a sharp breath. "That's yours?" Nietzsche gave a single nod. "It's not much, but it stands." The wagon rolled into the yard, wheels crunching over the frozen ground. Nietzsche set the brake, then climbed down. He offered his hand to help her, but did not press when she hesitated. Instead, he stepped back, allowing her to descend on her own. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and sage. The walls bore marks of use, but also care blankets woven with Apache patterns, a bow resting above the hearth. The place carried solitude, yet it was not empty. Nietzsche gestured toward a small stair. "Room upstairs, second door. It's yours." Eleanor climbed slowly, the weight of exhaustion dragging at her bones. The room held a narrow bed with a faded quilt, a chest at the foot, and a single window looking toward the mountains. She touched the quilt, fingers lingering on the stitches. It had been so long since she'd had a door to close behind her. Below, she heard the snap of firewood, the crackle of flame. The scent of coffee drifted up the stairs, rich and bitter. For the first time in months, warmth filled her lungs as she drew breath. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching Nietzsche's coat tighter around her shoulders. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, or whether this man's kindness would last. But tonight, in this house at Lone Butte, she was not shivering in an alley or praying for scraps. And that was enough. The storm had not eased by morning. Wind rattled the shutters and moaned around the eaves, flinging snow against the small paned glass, until it seemed the house itself shivered. Eleanor woke to the sound of it. The thin quilt tucked around her shoulders, her body still wrapped in the coat Nietzsche had given her. For a long while she lay still, listening. She heard the soft rhythm of a saw outside, then the steady thump of logs being stacked. The sound was reassuring, almost foreign, an ordinary rhythm she had not known in months. At last she rose, washed her face in the basin where ice still clung at the edges, and smoothed her hair with her fingers. When she descended the narrow stairs, the warmth of the hearth struck her. Nietzsche crouched by the fire, feeding split wood into the flames. He looked up briefly. "There's coffee on the stove." Eleanor hesitated, then poured herself a cup from the blackened pot. The tin mug was rough against her hands, but the heat seeped into her bones. She sipped cautiously, wincing at the bitterness. Still, it was the richest thing she had tasted in weeks. On the table beside her lay a small loaf of cornbread. She glanced at him. "Eat," Nietzsche said simply, as if reading her doubt. She broke off a piece, swallowing it quickly, though it caught in her dry throat. For a time neither spoke. Snow hissed against the roof. The fire cracked. At last Eleanor set her mug down. "I should earn what I take. You said you needed the house kept." Nietzsche nodded, his face unreadable. "Meals, wood stacked inside, floors swept. It won't be easy. You can leave whenever you want." Something in his tone, matter of fact, without pity, stirred a fragile sense of pride. He did not treat her as a charity case, nor as a burden. "I'll do it," she said. He inclined his head once, then returned to the fire. The days that followed passed in a strange rhythm, half familiar, half new. The cabin was sturdy but worn, dust heavy on shelves, floorboards dulled by years of use. Eleanor set herself to scrubbing, her muscles aching, her hands rubbed raw. She attempted simple meals, beans boiled too long, bacon blackened at the edges. On the third morning, she made the mistake of crowding too much wood into the iron stove. Flames roared higher than she expected, and when she leaned close to stir the pot, the edge of her sleeve brushed the grate. Fire leapt in an instant. Her scream tore the silence. She stumbled back, batting at the flames. The door burst open. Nietzsche strode in from the yard, seized the water bucket, and doused her. Steam rose, and she collapsed onto the floor, drenched, trembling, heart hammering as if it might leap from her chest. For a long moment, neither spoke. Water pooled across the planks. Her voice shook. "I can't even cook breakfast. I'll ruin everything." Nietzsche crouched beside her, his scarred arm dripping from the bucket's splash. His voice was calm, unhurried. "The stove's temperamental. Takes learning. You're not the first to fight it." He stood, fetched a blanket, and draped it over her shoulders. "Come." Shivering, Eleanor followed him back to the stove. For the next hour he showed her how to bank the coals, how to shift the damper, how to find the hot spots by feeling the iron with a bare hand held just above it. His voice never rose, his hands steady as they guided hers. She watched him closely, not only his instructions, but the patience in them. She had known men whose anger boiled over at the smallest mistake. Nietzsche's manner unsettled her more. His quiet steadiness left no room for shame, only the possibility of learning. That evening, when she returned to her room, she found a small bundle laid neatly atop her quilt. Wrapped in brown paper were 2 pairs of wool stockings and a heavier shawl, coarse but warm. Beneath them lay a note written in careful, uneven English letters. "Cold is coming. Thought you might need these." Her throat tightened. She pressed the shawl to her face, breathing in the faint scent of cedar. Snow continued to fall, but the cabin grew more lived in with each day. Eleanor mended curtains, scrubbed pans until they gleamed, and stacked wood by the hearth. Nietzsche never failed to thank her after each meal, even when beans scorched or bread fell heavy. Sometimes he worked in silence, repairing a loose hinge or mending tack in the barn. Other times, she caught him watching her with a guarded expression, as though weighing something unspoken. One afternoon, while sweeping dust from the parlor, Eleanor found a slim book tucked behind a pile of ledgers. It was a volume of poems, pages yellowed, the spine cracked. She opened it gently and saw words underlined in pencil. "You read." Nietzsche's voice came from the doorway. Startled, she closed the book quickly. "Yes. I used to teach children at our church school." He nodded once, stepping inside. "I never learned much reading. Only some. My sister. She tried." His voice trailed. Eleanor hesitated, then opened the book again. "Would you like me to read some aloud?" For the first time, his mouth curved slightly. "If you want." So she read, her voice carrying the rhythm of verse through the quiet cabin. He sat across from her, listening, eyes lowered, but intent. For a moment, the storm outside seemed far away. When she finished, silence lingered between them, not empty, but full of something she could not yet name. It was on the 5th evening that she learned a piece of his sorrow. She had been putting away dishes when her hand brushed against a small wooden box on the shelf. The lid slipped open, revealing a silver bracelet etched with Apache patterns. Nietzsche's voice came low, steady behind her. "Put it back." She turned quickly, shame flooding her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." He stepped forward, closing the box with care. For a long while he stared at it, his jaw tight. "That was hers," he said at last. "Iolana. We were to be married. Soldiers burned the village. She didn't make it out." Eleanor's breath caught. She looked at his scarred arm, the twisted skin. "You tried." His eyes lifted to hers, gray and unyielding. "I tried, and failed." The weight of his loss filled the room, pressing against her chest. She wanted to speak comfort, but the words felt hollow, so she'd only said softly, "I'm sorry." He gave a single nod, then turned away. That night, Eleanor lay awake in the small upstairs room, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. She thought of her own loss as the father who had believed her brother's lies, the congregation that had turned cold shoulders, the name smeared beyond repair. She had been cast out, as if her worth were nothing. And here, in this house at the base of Lone Butte, she lived alongside a man who had known his own kind of exile. Different, but not unlike. Snow still howled beyond the glass. Yet within these walls, for the first time in months, she felt something stir beneath the weight of hunger and shame. It was not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. The storm finally broke on the 7th morning. Gray skies lifted to a pale winter sun, its light glancing off snowdrifts piled high along the butte. Icicles clung like daggers to the eaves, dripping slow beads of water as if the land itself exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Eleanor stepped outside with a bucket in each hand. the cold biting her cheeks. The silence was vast, no wagons clattering, no town bells, only the creak of branches under snow. In the distance, she heard the faint fall of a hawk circling above the valley. Nietzsche was already at the corral, breaking ice from the horse's trough. His movements were efficient, practiced. She watched him for a moment, the way his braid swung across his back, the way his scarred arm moved no less sure than the other. He looked as though he belonged to this land, carved of the same granite and cedar. When he noticed her gaze, he gave the faintest nod. "Chickens will need fodder too." She smiled despite herself. "Yes, sir." Later, while sweeping the parlor, Eleanor's broom bumped against the shelf where the small wooden box rested. This time she did not open it, but the memory of the bracelet inside lingered, gleaming with a story of love ended in flame. That evening, as they shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, she gathered courage. "You loved her deeply," she said softly. Nietzsche's eyes lifted, steady on hers. He did not ask how she knew. "She was my betrothed," he said. "We grew together. Iolana believed the land could heal even after war. She carried songs from her mother. I thought I would carry them with her forever." Eleanor waited, sensing the rest. "Soldiers came at night," he continued, voice flat with old pain. "They burned everything. I tried to pull her from the flames. That is how." He gestured to the scarred arm. She did not wake again. Eleanor's throat tightened. She had seen death in her own way, an old woman in her congregation passing, children buried after fever, but never a future torn away so violently. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words small against the weight of his grief. Nietzsche studied her, gray eyes unreadable. "We all carry ghosts. What of yours?" Her spoon clattered softly against the tin plate. For a long time she stared into the fire, the shadows flickering across the floor. "My brother," she said at last. "Charles. He is the reason I'm here." Nietzsche said nothing, waiting. "He took money from our church, a large sum, saved for building repairs. I saw him slip the coins into his coat. When I spoke of it, he turned the blame on me, said I had stolen it. He was father's favored child. They believed him. Even the pastor looked at me as if I were filth. I was told to leave before shame fell on them further." Her voice cracked. "I begged them. I swore it was not me. But lies travel faster than truth. And so I left." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the pop of burning wood. Nietzsche's face did not soften, but his words held weight. "Truth has long roads. Lies have quick ones. But the long road endures." She met his gaze, startled by the calm certainty. No one had ever spoken to her that way, as if her word carried strength. The following week brought a change. Snow melted from the cabin roof, dripping into ruts carved by deer. The air smelled faintly of thaw, though winter's grip still held. Eleanor busied herself mending torn curtains, her hands steadier than when she had first arrived. Nietzsche rode down to town one morning for salt and flour. Eleanor waited, tidying the shelves, setting cornbread to Reese. She was bent over the stove when the door opened. Nietzsche stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders. But his expression was darker than she had yet seen. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. He set the sack of supplies on the table. "Your brother, Charles Hayes, he is in Silver Rock." Her heart jolted, breath catching sharp. "He found me. He asks questions," Nietzsche continued. "Told the shopkeep you were a thief, said you ran from Missouri with stolen money. He carries papers he claims prove it." Eleanor gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white. The old fear rushed back, but with it came anger. "He would forge anything," she said. "Lie to anyone. He cannot let me speak. If I told what I know, what he truly did, his name would be ruined. He would see me silenced first." Nietzsche's gaze sharpened. Tell me. So she did. She told him of Charles's debts at the gaming tables, the night she found him rifling the church chest, the bruises she had seen once on a merchant's daughter who had fled town the next day. She told of her father's cold face, choosing his son's word over hers. When she finished, her hands shook. She braced them against the table, ashamed of the tremor. Nietzsche regarded her with the same steady calm he had shown since the night they met. I believe you. The words landed heavy and sure, like stones placed into an empty foundation. Eleanor's throat closed, tears burning her eyes. No one had spoken them before. Not her father, not her pastor, not a soul. Why? She whispered. Because your voice does not hide, he said simply. A liar looks away. You did not. For a long moment, she could not speak. She pressed a hand to her mouth, swallowing hard. That night, Eleanor lay awake long after the fire had burned low. She stared at the rafters, hearing the wind whistle faintly through cracks in the walls. Charles was near. The man who had stolen her name, her home, her place in the world. He would come soon enough, with his smile and his papers, with his polished lies. But for the first time, she was not alone. Downstairs, Nietzsche moved quietly, tending embers, the steady rhythm of a man who had weathered storms greater than this. She thought of his words, truth has long roads, and held them close. Still, fear gnawed at her. Charles was clever and wealthier than she could hope to fight. Silver Rock was no friend to an outcast, much less a woman living under the roof of an Apache. Her eyes closed tight against the ache in her chest. But even as sleep claimed her, one thought steadied her pulse. If Charles came, he would not find her defenseless. Not anymore. The sound of hooves reached the cabin long before the figures came into view. Eleanor froze at the window, her hands clutching the curtain so tightly the fabric bunched between her fingers. Down the snowy track rode 3 men. The lead rider sat tall in the saddle, his coat dark and trimmed in fur, his hat tipped at a practiced angle. Even from a distance, she recognized the smooth posture, the way he held himself, as if the land itself should bow beneath his boots. Charles. Her stomach turned cold. She had known this moment would come, but knowing had not prepared her. Nietzsche stepped up behind her, his presence steady as stone. Stay inside, he said quietly. No. Her voice shook, but she did not look away from the window. This is my ghost. I won't hide from it. By the time the riders reined in at the yard, Eleanor had gathered enough breath to open the door. Snow swirled around them as Charles dismounted with practiced grace, his boots sinking into the drift. The 2 men behind him, hired guns by their look, remained in their saddles, eyes cold and watchful. Well, well, Charles drawled, removing his gloves with a snap. My little sister, you do know how to vanish when it suits you. Eleanor stood in the doorway, spine rigid. What do you want, Charles? To bring you home, of course. His smile was all charm, polished to gleam like a knife. Father worries, the congregation too. There's a place for you yet, if you'll admit your mistakes. I made none. The smile tightened. He glanced at Nietzsche, who now stood at her shoulder, arms crossed, unyielding. And I see you've found peculiar company. Is this what you've come to, Eleanor? Hiding in a savage's shack? Nietzsche did not flinch, his gaze fixed on Charles. His voice was catre, but sharp. Watch your words. Charles chuckled, though unease flickered in his eyes. So protective. I suppose she's paying her keep somehow. Eleanor's face burned. She took a step forward. Enough. Say what you came to say. Charles slipped a folded paper from his coat, holding it up. Debt, he announced. $300 missing from the church strongbox. Witnesses place you there that night. Your own father signed this affidavit. You owe the money and your reputation. Nietzsche extended a hand. Let me see. Charles hesitated, then sneered. Not for your eyes, Injun. This is family business. Then you can leave, Nietzsche said. His tone was calm, but the air around him seemed to tighten. Charles's eyes narrowed. Careful. I'm not alone. He gestured toward the gunmen on horseback. Nietzsche did not move. If you believe in your paper, take it to a sheriff, not to my door. The standoff stretched, brittle as ice. Eleanor's hands trembled, but fury welled up hotter than fear. For years she had let Charles's words shape her life, his lies paint her worth. Not now, not here. She turned, eyes falling on the Winchester rifle that hung on hooks above the door. Slowly, she lifted it down. The wood was cold beneath her palms, heavy, unfamiliar, but she raised it, barrel steady though her heart thundered. Go, she said. Her voice carried clear into the still air. Charles blinked, surprise flashing before he masked it with another smile. Little sister, you wouldn't dare. Try me. Her finger brushed the trigger. For the first time, Charles's mask cracked. His gaze flicked between her eyes and the dark mouth of the rifle. Then he laughed, a sound brittle as broken glass. Very well, I'll leave. But this isn't over. You think this half-breed can shield you? You'll see how quick the town turns when I'm done speaking. He stepped back, pulled his gloves on, and swung into the saddle. With a sharp tug on the reins, he wheeled his horse and spurred it down the trail, his men following. Snow closed behind them, the sound of hooves fading into the silence. Eleanor's arms sagged, the rifle slipping in her grip. She nearly dropped it. Nietzsche stepped forward, steadying the weapon before easing it from her hands. You did well, he said. Her breath came hard, uneven. I couldn't let him. She pressed her hands to her face. God, I was shaking all over. Courage is not without fear, Nietzsche said softly. It is standing anyway. Eleanor lowered her hands, tears slipping free. He won't stop. He never does. Nietzsche set the rifle back on its hooks. Then neither will we. That night the fire burned low, but neither found easy sleep. Eleanor sat at the table, staring at the silver bracelet still hidden in the wooden box, thinking of how Nietzsche's grief had not broken him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Why did you take up the rifle? She looked at him, startled. Because I had to. You could have stayed inside. I've hidden enough, she said fiercely. Then her voice softened. He has taken so much from me already. I won't let him take the little I have found here. For a moment, Nietzsche only studied her, the lamplight catching in his gray eyes. Then he gave a single nod, as if acknowledging not just her words, but the truth behind them. Eleanor turned back to the fire, a strange calm settling over her. For the first time, she had not cowered before her brother's power. For the first time, she had stood, and Nietzsche had stood with her. The following days were heavy with watchfulness. Eleanor caught herself glancing toward the road at every sound, expecting riders. Nietzsche went about his chores with quiet precision, but she sensed his vigilance sharpened, like a bowstring drawn taut. One morning, as they worked side by side stacking wood, Eleanor spoke the thought that weighed on her. You don't have to carry this with me. Charles is my burden. Nietzsche straightened, snow dusting his shoulders. When I was a child, my people signed a treaty. Promises of peace, land, protection. None were kept. We learned not to trust words, only actions. Family does not always guard you, but sometimes a stranger will. That is how I see it. Eleanor blinked, throat tight. You would stand against him? Against the whole town, if it comes to that? His gaze was steady, unwavering. I stand where truth does. Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken for her that way. But the reprieve did not last. On the third evening, just as the sun dipped behind the butte, the sound of hooves returned. Eleanor's heart clenched. This time it was not Charles. Sheriff Dalton rode up with 2 deputies, their badges gleaming in the dying light. Snow crunched under their boots as they dismounted, faces solemn. Dalton removed a folded paper from his coat. "Miss Hayes," he said heavily, "I'm afraid I've got a warrant for your arrest. Theft and fraud. Amounts now $500. Eleanor's knees weakened. Charles had not wasted time. Nietzsche stepped forward, his scarred arm tense at his side. "Let me see the paper." Dalton handed it over reluctantly. Nietzsche scanned the words, jaw tightening. "This is forged," Eleanor whispered. "It has to be." Dalton sighed. "Maybe, but it bears the judge's mark from Prescott. Until it's sorted, I have to take you in." The deputies shifted, hands near their holsters. The cold air thickened with tension. Eleanor raised her chin, though her heart hammered. "Then at least let me send one message, one telegram." Dalton hesitated. "You've until morning." He turned, climbing back into the saddle. "Be ready, Miss Hayes. Don't make me drag you." As they rode away, silence fell heavy. The snow drifted down, soft as ash. Eleanor clutched the shawl Nietzsche had given her, breath ragged. "He means to bury me, Nietzsche, and I can't fight him." Nietzsche's eyes locked on hers, steady as the mountains. "Then we fight together." The night after the sheriff's visit pressed down heavier than the storm had ever done. The little cabin at Lone Butte, once a refuge, felt suddenly fragile against the weight of the outside world. Snow whispered against the windows, but Eleanor could not keep still. She paced the narrow floor, her shawl clutched tight, her mind racing with every word Dalton had spoken. $500. It was no small sum. Enough to purchase a team of horses, enough to ruin a reputation beyond repair. And on paper, it was her crime. Nietzsche sat by the fire, sharpening his knife with slow, even strokes, as if the steady rasp of stone on steel might keep the world in order. His gray eyes followed her movements, without comment. At last she stopped, her voice breaking. "There's no way to fight this. My brother has money, friends, the ear of men in office, and I—" She pressed a fist to her chest. "I have nothing." Nietzsche set the knife aside. "You have truth." She laughed bitterly. "Truth doesn't matter in a courtroom built on lies. I've already lived that." He rose, crossing the room until he stood before her. The firelight caught the scars on his arm, twisting shadows over his skin. "Then we take truth where it can be heard." Her brows knit. "Where?" "The telegraph runs to Prescott now," he said. "You told me once of Judge Whitford, that he doubted your brother before." Eleanor's breath caught. Judge Whitford. A stern man, but one who had looked at her with searching eyes the day she was cast out. Could he truly be her salvation? "Would he listen?" she whispered. Nietzsche's jaw was firm. "He will listen to you. If not, then we find another. But we do not kneel to Charles's lies." Her throat tightened. "And if this fails? If the judge believes him too?" Nietzsche's gaze did not waver. "Then I stand beside you, wherever it leads." Tears blurred her sight. She turned away, afraid to let him see how those words struck her. For so long she had been alone, carrying shame that was not hers. To hear someone claim her side, so simply, it was more than her heart could bear. At dawn, Nietzsche saddled his horse. The air bit sharp, the sky washed pale with early light. Eleanor stood at the gate, watching him tie the message to the saddlebag. "Let me go with you," she said. He shook his head. "Too many eyes in town. They would seize you before a word was sent." Her fingers twisted in the shawl. "What if they stop you?" "They won't." His voice carried quiet certainty. He mounted, glancing down at her. "Write it in your hand. Let him see it's yours." So she took the paper he offered, her fingers trembling as she wrote, "Judge Whitford Charles Hayes, guilty of theft, fraud, and worse. I am innocent. Investigate. Speak with the family of Margaret Willis, the girl he ruined. Truth matters more than blood. Eleanor Hayes." She handed it up, her heart pounding. "It's not enough." "It is a beginning," Nietzsche said. Then he turned his horse and rode down the snowy track, his figure growing small against the white horizon. Eleanor stood watching until he vanished. Only then did she return inside, clutching the empty space his absence left behind. The day dragged like years. Eleanor tried to keep busy, sweeping, mending, even stirring a pot she barely tasted. Every sound from the road sent her heart lurching. She imagined Dalton arriving early, dragging her away in irons. She imagined Charles spreading his lies through the town, building a gallows of words. By afternoon, the tension broke. She dropped the broom, burying her face in her hands. Her body shook with stunned sobs. When the door opened near dusk, she startled so hard she nearly cried out. But it was Nietzsche, snow clinging to his coat, his braid damp. He carried the air of distance, of one who had ridden far. "It is sent," he said simply. Her knees weakened with relief. She sank into a chair, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Thank God." Nietzsche moved closer, crouching before her. "Now we wait." Her eyes lifted to his. In the fire's glow, his face was weary, but resolute. Something inside her broke open. "I can't ask you to risk yourself," she whispered. "Charles will turn them against you as easily as me. You'll be marked as the savage who hides a thief." "I have lived with their names all my life," he said calmly. "It changes nothing. But you," his voice grew softer, "you carry more strength than you know. Do not give it away to him." Her breath hitched. She searched his eyes, finding no doubt there, only a steadfastness that rooted her. "Why do you care, Nietzsche? Why stand with me when it brings you only danger?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I love you." The words struck like an arrow, swift and certain. She froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. He did not flinch. "I did not expect it, did not seek it, but it is the truth. I love you, Eleanor Hayes." Tears stung her eyes. She shook her head, voice raw. "You can't. If you knew everything what they've called me, the shame, the filth, they believe I'm not worth it." His hand rose, rough and scarred, resting gently against her cheek. "I know enough. I know you fight even when fear shakes you. I know you stood against your brother with a rifle in your hands. I know you speak truth when lies would be easier. That is worth everything." Her tears spilled freely, hot against his palm. For a moment, she let herself lean into the touch, let herself believe she could be seen, truly seen, and not cast aside. Her voice failed. She swallowed. "I don't know how to carry such words. Not yet." Nietzsche did not press. His hand fell away, but the steadiness in his eyes did not falter. "Then hold them until you are ready. They will wait." That night they slept little. Eleanor lay awake in the narrow bed, listening to the wind hush and rise again. Downstairs she heard Nietzsche moving, pacing, as if keeping watch against more than snow. Before dawn, hooves sounded outside. Not one horse this time, but 3. Eleanor's heart lurched. She rose, clutching her shawl, and peered through the window. Sheriff Dalton again, with his deputies. A knock shook the door. Nietzsche was already there, opening it with a measured calm. Dalton stood framed against the gray morning, his face solemn. In his hand he carried the folded warrant. "Miss Hayes," he said heavily, "time's up. Unless you've got proof, I have to take you." Eleanor descended the stairs, her chin lifted despite the tremor in her stomach. We sent word to Judge Whitford. He will answer. Dalton frowned. Maybe. But I can't hold off on a maybe. Nietzsche stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway. One more day. Dalton shifted, uneasy. I'm already bending the law, giving her this long. Eleanor drew a deep breath. Please, just until tomorrow's post. If there is no answer, I will go with you myself. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. At last he sighed. Tomorrow, but not an hour longer. He turned, mounting his horse. Snow muffled the sound of hooves as the men rode away. Eleanor leaned against the doorframe, her body weak with relief and dread in equal measure. Nietzsche stood beside her, scarred arm tense at his side. They will not give up, he said. Neither will Charles, she whispered. Her eyes lifted to his. Then what do we do? Nietzsche's gaze was steady, unflinching. We wait, and we stand. The morning broke pale and sharp, the sky a sheet of steel over the Chiricahuas. Eleanor had not slept. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cold mug, eyes fixed on the door. Every creak of wood, every groan of the wind set her pulse racing. Nietzsche moved quietly about the cabin, stacking wood, checking his rifle. Though he never said as much. He was ready if Charles came first, ready if Dalton rode with chains. But Eleanor knew he was waiting for one thing, as much as she was. The answer. It came near midday. The sound of hooves crunched through the snowpack, steady and deliberate. Eleanor rose, breath caught in her chest. Nietzsche stepped to the door, opening it before the knock came. A rider sat tall in the saddle, his coat dark against the pale light. The telegraph clerk's boy, not Dalton, not Charles. In his hand he carried a yellow slip of paper. Message from Prescott, he called. Eleanor's knees nearly gave way. She stumbled forward, taking the paper with trembling fingers. Nietzsche closed the door behind her. The cold wind cut off as she tore it open. Her eyes scanned the lines. Words blurred, then sharpened. Charles Hayes under investigation for fraud and perjury. Witness testimony corroborates abuse of Margaret Willis. Federal marshal en route. Charges against Eleanor Hayes suspended. Pending review. Judge Whitford. The slip fell from her hand. A sob broke loose, raw and unguarded. He believed me, she whispered. He believed me. Nietzsche stooped, retrieving the paper, reading it himself with careful eyes. He gave a single nod. Truth found its road. Eleanor covered her face with both hands, shaking with relief that poured through her like fire after frost. Months of exile, of silence, of carrying shame that was not hers, it broke all at once, leaving her hollow and whole in the same breath. Nietzsche's hand came to her shoulder, steady and warm. She clutched it like an anchor. By the next day, the federal marshal arrived. A tall man in a dusted coat, his voice even, his eyes sharp. He sat in the parlor with a worn notebook, listening as Eleanor spoke. She told it all the night she saw Charles take the coins, the lies he spun, the way her father had turned Pote. She told of Margaret Willis, the bruises she had seen, the family that vanished overnight. Her voice trembled, but she did not falter. Nietzsche sat beside her, tolerant but present, his steady gaze a shield. When she finished, the marshal closed his notebook. You'll not hang for his sins, he said. Not while I carry badge and law. Charles Hayes will answer for what he's done. Eleanor bowed her head, tears pricking her eyes. The marshal tipped his hat and rose. You've got allies now, more than you think. Judge Whitford's pushing hard and the truth's catching up to your brother faster than he reckoned. When he left, silence filled the cabin again. Eleanor sat staring into the fire, her hands limp in her lap. Nietzsche broke it at last. It is finished. She turned to him, shaking her head. Not finished, but begun. He inclined his head in quiet agreement. A week later, a letter came. The handwriting was one she had known all her life, firm, precise, a little cold. Her father's. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "I have no excuse for what I have done. I believed the son who flattered me, and cast out the daughter who spoke truth. I let pride blind me. I see now the wreckage it wrought. The marshal has shown me enough to shatter every lie I clung to. I beg you, if you can find it in your heart, let me see you again before I go to dust. Not to bring you home, but to know the woman you have become. Your father, Nathaniel Hayes." Eleanor read it twice, tears blurring her sight. She pressed it to her chest, her body trembling. Nietzsche found her there, the paper clutched tight in her hands. He read it silently, then set it down beside the bracelet of Iolana on the mantel. "You will go to him," he said softly. "Not now," she whispered. "Not yet. But maybe, someday." He nodded. "When you do, you will not go alone." Her throat closed, tears spilling freely. Spring crept slowly into the valley. Snow melted from the ridges, water running down in shining streams. Grass pushed green shoots through the thawed earth. The ranch stirred to life, chickens scratching, horses restless, the air carrying scents of cedar and wet soil. Eleanor worked beside Nietzsche, planting a patch of beans and squash. Her hands, once soft, grew calloused. Her shoulders, once bent by shame, now straightened with pride. Each furrow turned in the soil felt like a piece of herself reclaimed. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the ski burn with pink and gold. Sometimes they spoke. Often they did not need to. The silence between them had grown into something rich, not empty. One such evening, as dusk painted the land in lavender, Nietzsche turned to her. His hand slipped into his coat, drawing out the silver bracelet she had once glimpsed in the wooden box. He held it carefully, reverently, the firelight glinting on the engraved patterns. "This belonged to Iolana," he said. "She was my past, but I cannot carry her alone forever. The land taught me that fire must be tended, or it dies. I would give this to you, not to replace her, but to begin anew." Her breath caught. "Nietzsche." He knelt, his voice quiet but steady. "Will you walk this road with me? Not as debt, not as shelter, but as joy." Tears welled, but her smile broke through them, trembling. "Yes," she whispered. Then firmer, stronger, from the depths of a heart no longer bowed. "Yes." He clasped the bracelet around her wrist. His hand lingered, rough and warm against her skin. She leaned into him, their foreheads touching as the first stars glimmered above the butte. Weeks later, as birds nested beneath the eaves and calves bawled in the pasture, Eleanor stood once more on the porch, watching the land breathe back into life. Nietzsche came beside her, a mug of coffee in hand, his presence as steady as the mountains. She glanced at him, her fingers brushing the bracelet. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what might have happened if you hadn't stepped into that alley in Silver Rock?" Nietzsche sipped, his eyes on the horizon. "I think the wind would still have howled and the snow still fallen. But this house would be empty, and I would still be waiting for something I did not know I needed." Her chest ached with quiet joy. She leaned against him, his arm slipping around her shoulders. "This place," she whispered, "it isn't just shelter. It's home." Yet the wind swept gentle over the valley, carrying the scent of spring earth and cedar smoke. The storms had passed. Shadows of ghosts still lingered, but they no longer ruled her. Together, Eleanor and Nietzsche watched the sun sink behind Lone Butte, the light fading into the promise of night. And in that promise, they chose each other. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this one.